Hi guys, welcome back. Back in the garage. The temperature's warmed up a little bit from what it was. We've got Christmas out the way. I tried to get as much footage out as I could over Christmas. Got a few videos out, which is good. Back with a cheap versus expensive, back into the rifle scene, and I'm going to take a look at some bipods. So bipods and front support in general, and even rear support with the rifle, is something that people kind of leave till the last minute. They buy the rifle, they buy the optic, you know, it's all exciting, get some ammunition, magazines and whatever, and then they kind of have a think about all this other stuff after the fact, and often they make some pretty poor decisions in terms of budget. When you're looking at budget for a precision shooting rig, bolt action rifle or DMR, you need to budget for the whole system. So be realistic, you know. A decent bipod is going to be quite a lump of money, and although we don't like to pay out a lot of money for stuff like bipods, the fact remains that they have a big impact on how your final precision is going to be in that system. So you might have a half-minute precision rifle when you've paid £3,000, £4,000 for it, or you know, $5,000–6,000 or whatever, and that's all very good, but that half-minute precision rifle is only half-minute precision in terms of the system and the context it's working within. So if you're thinking that that's going to just be half-minute no matter what, you know, if you're shooting that standing up off the shoulder with no support, there's no way that's going to be a half-minute system unless you're some kind of superhuman being. And all these things have an impact on your final results. So bipod is one I see people scrimp and scrape a lot about, and the real question is, you know, can you save money on the bipod? Is it worth buying cheap, or is it worth buying really expensive? You know, the saying buy once, cry once kind of rings true to me a lot in this game, that if you buy really cheap you can end up falling foul of that, and then you end up having to buy the expensive version after buying the cheap version because it just lets you down. But sometimes you know, you can get a bargain and it works out well. So I've been using various different bipods for about 25 to 30 years. I've got a lot of experience with them. I know the sort of nuances with the different systems, and we can place this all in context with what we're doing with them as well. You know, that's going to have a big impact on whether you need to spend a lot of money or not. So we'll go from what everyone's probably very used to seeing. That's a Harris bipod with a pick mount on top. They normally don't come with a pick mount, they normally come with just a little grabbing device which will hold a sling swivel. So these ones are using these very big springs. You've got to be careful when they're off the rifle because they can snip your fingers, and it just springs out like so. Now Harris bipods are actually quite well made. They're very, very rugged. They're not massively cheap. I mean, they used to be a lot cheaper than they are these days, but you know, they're reasonably priced in terms of bipods. I'll put some links up down the bottom, but I would say, you know, these represent the lower end of the budget. The legs shoot out like so. You can get these in different lengths, etc., and then when you want to pop them back in, you just press that catch there, and these spring back in. The spring loaded. Now the spring loaded legs have their ups and downs. Sometimes that can be a little bit annoying on the range when you're trying to set the height. They're good when they're on the rifle and you just spring them out and they kind of find where you want them to be. That's great, but sometimes I find they're a bit awkward to actually push back in when you're on the rifle itself. So the downsides to these systems: they're heavy, they're quite cumbersome. Weight is going to be a big deal if you're a you know, doing precision rifle and you're running around with the gun, doing any sort of run and gun stuff, or if you're a tactical user and, you know, weight's a huge issue, then you're going to try and shave whatever weight you can off your system because you're having to run around with it all the time. So these might not be great. They are robust, as I said. The other downside to these is that they're only locked in one way. So that way they're braced, and then that way they will fold up, and there's nothing that locks that leg back out. So if you were to mount it, if your rifle was facing that way, then you could push against that and the legs won't fold up on you. But under recoil, if you're shooting like a 50 cal and the rifle propels backwards, then it's incredibly likely that that leg can fold, and then the rifle's just going to drop on the floor. So for heavy caliber stuff, or for stuff where you're moving a lot around in your position, and say you're a tactical user and you might have to pull back or pull forward, and you're dragging your kit around on the floor, you're dragging the bipod around on the floor, this to me just doesn't brace you in enough. It's kind of okay if you're just going to be a target shooter, completely static. The other thing I find with these is a lot of vibration through them. You know, they're quite a sort of tinny system, and with the springs and everything like that, they tend to give a bit of a twang through the system. Because people talk about harmonics of a rifle, you mustn't forget that harmonics is the whole system. You know, that harmonic wave travels through the system, through your body, through the ground. So all those things have an impact on the harmonics of the system, and you will actually see point of impact change slightly if you shoot on different types of ground, if you use different types of bipods. You know, all that has an effect if you have a really light shooter in contrast with a really heavy shooter who's got a lot of body fat versus someone who's really skinny. All those things affect your harmonic, and that thing has quite a lot of zing to it. You know, you can almost hear it sort of twang as you shoot, but as I said, it's reasonably priced, it's really robust. So on to probably the next most popular choice of bipod. This is an Atlas bipod, and it's not spring loaded. The legs simply pull up and down by sliding that. You can do it one-handed. The legs lock in really nicely. The legs on this do not turn once they're locked in. Very, very easy to manipulate while you're on the rifle. You can lock the legs in a variety of different positions using this here, so you can see various different places you can lock the legs. So you can lock them in any way. They can even be locked in different directions should you wish to. Again, that's got a pick mount on top, but you can get various different mounting options. That's American Defense Manufacturing mount, which are really good mounts, by the way, if you're looking for Picatinny mounts for your bipods. Got rubber feet. I believe you can buy different types of feet. I don't like the spike feet because I like the system to be able to move in the ground when you shoot it. I don't think there's too much benefit from spikes unless you're shooting really small caliber stuff, and the spikes will actually prevent recoil. But for, you know, anything over a 308, forget that. It's always going to be ripping itself out of the ground. And if you limit a system with heavy recoil from movement, all that's happening is that energy is going somewhere, and it's, generally speaking, going to start ripping apart the, you know, the mounts and stuff on your bipod, and just damage it over time. And for the limited benefit it has, I really don't see the point in doing that. Now, these are great. I love Atlas bipods. They do have models that have a wider stance for heavier caliber rifles. I really don't have any issue with these at all, other than the fact they cost quite a bit of money. I would say they're getting up towards the upper end. They're sort of I don't know, 150 to 200 kind of category. which some people might think is a little bit expensive. Now on the bottom of there is a wheel that you can turn, and that adds friction to this top piece. So when you unscrew that wheel, you've got some cant on the top there, and it will also turn one way and the other, and it's still under a lot of friction, so it's quite difficult for me to turn that with my hand. Now the good thing about that is when you stick a really heavy rifle on it, you need that friction so the thing isn't wobbling all over the place, and it's really smooth, a bit like a decent ball head on a tripod. If you've got a heavy camera system mounted on there, you want the movement of that to be nice and slow and controlled, and if it was really loose and flopping around all over the place, you know, the camera would just be wiggling around. You get the same thing with the rifle. You don't want the rifle to be really uncontrolled, and you want it to be nice and smooth so you can bring it onto target smoothly, nice and straight, move it around up and down, everything smooth. These do just that, so they give a nice level of friction, and then when you do this thing up, so you can lock it right up, and that thing is absolutely solid. So once you're in your position that you want to stay in, you can lock that solid and it won't move anywhere. So it is really well made. This one has been on 338s, 50 cals. It's been doing that for about the last 7 or 8 years, and it hasn't dropped a beat. You know, it doesn't really get any service or anything like that, so it's incredibly robust. We haven't had any trouble with these at all. The only caveat I would say is that for some of the much larger guns, even the larger of the Atlas models is maybe dwarfed a little bit by the gun, and we wanted something a bit bigger and had a bit of a wider stance. Now, some people that look at the Atlas bipods and are impressed by those go for a budget version. So this is the Amazon Chinese cheapo version of an Atlas, a rip-off version. So you can see everything about it is virtually the same. You've got the same type of legs. Now the material feels not quite as well machined. It's a bit rougher as you slide it in and out. It's just a little bit more clunky. It still is robust, it's still metal material. The rubber on the bottom is not quite as malleable and soft as you get on an original Atlas. That's more like a sort of heavy plastic, and these legs aren't quite as firmly held. The machining on there isn't quite as good, but they do have the same system on there that they lock in and out, but there's a little bit more wobble around on them. The legs also spin, which I don't like, because if you're sitting this thing down into the ground and you're trying to push it forward or backward, because a lot of people when they shoot, they want to put forward pressure on the bipod and maintain that pressure onto the bipod. With these, as you push forward on it, the legs just spin and it kind of walks itself along the ground, which isn't ideal. And the worst part for me is the locking ring. So it has the same system on it, but on this one, if you release it, I can do that with one finger. It's literally wiggling all over the place. So as I just said, talking about the Atlas, that you really don't want that, because the rifle's just flopping around, and if it flops around too much, a big heavy rifle on there will flop right over and it'll actually drag itself over onto the ground and maybe damage the scope. And also it's just really bad for getting on target. You want that nice smooth movement on there. And the worst part of this is when I do that right up, so I do it up as hard as I possibly can, can't do it any harder. That should be now locked in place, but no, I can move that around with one finger, and it's still got not even as much friction as the Atlas has when it isn't done up. So you just cannot maintain any high level of friction on these. Now I've sat this thing on AIAX 308s and 338s, and even those two systems are too heavy for this, because even when you've locked that up as tight as can be, you know, I've had a glove on and really tried to wind this on, and the rifle weight with the scope weight on top, you've got all that weight sitting on there, it just wants to tip over all the time. So now I'm actually using my own musculature on my body to keep that rifle sat straight on the bipod. Now the downside about that is, if you're precision shooting, the last thing you want to be doing is imparting muscle onto the gun. You want to be as least contact as possible while still maintaining control of the rifle, because every time you're muscling that gun, you're adding movement to it, and obviously your whole point of, you know, precision shooting is not to have the rifle moving around while you're taking aim. You're trying to breathe through the shot, slow down nice and steady, stop, take the shot. If I'm muscling the thing really hard, then all that movement from my muscle is coming into the rifle, and I don't get that nice steady shot. So I really don't like these. It cost about £25 plus P&P. It took a few weeks to come. I think we bought two just to see, you know, if they would be any good at all, and they're junk. I would caveat that if you are shooting 2.2 rimfire or air rifle and the system is nice and light and you don't have a really heavy scope on top, and you're just plinking away in the garden, or you're doing a bit of vermin control or something like that, then I don't think they're too bad. You know, you don't want to spend hundreds of pounds if you're just doing something along those lines, and because of the weight of the system you're going to be using, it's absolutely going to be fine on that. You're not going to get too much movement. It probably has got enough friction on there to lock the rifle down and keep it from wiggling about too much. So personally, for that, I wouldn't have an issue. I go ratting with an air rifle, and because all the NV gear I've got on it, I still end up with quite a heavy rig. I've tried it on one of those, even for me with the air rifle and all the NV gear on there, it was no good. I was getting too much movement on there. So now we go to the really high end, and this is what I tend to use for big caliber stuff. So this is an AccuTac Bipod. I can't remember the model name on this one, but it is an absolute beast. The legs are actually spring loaded the other way, and they've got this lever on here, so you just spring them back in, which I actually prefer to legs that spring out, and just push that lever up and pull them out, and then you can spring them back in, no problem at all. These feet screw in, so you can actually get different feet for those. I think you can get ski feet, spikes, etc. Nice solid feet on there, again with a nice decent soft rubber, so you're getting a good bit of grip if you're shooting on things like you know, any sort of hard surface, brick and stuff like that, or rock. Really overbuilt and very robust indeed. On these, you're pulling the leg and then you can move it out. They do only have that one option, you know, you're either out to the front or you're in position, or you're tucked right back up. So I just deploy both the legs, and it is very robust indeed. You can see how I'm trying to manipulate it. It is a beast of a bit of kit. It's a real thorough piece of engineering. It has this locking piece in the middle, which if you undo that, it controls the canton here, and again, once you're in position and you're happy with the cant, you can control the amount of friction you've got and then lock that back up, and once that's locked up, that does not move. I've had 50 cals galore on this thing. You know, suppressed 50s, banging away 100 or so rounds, and when that's locked up, it does not move. The wide stance on it is absolutely excellent for stability on those big systems. It's probably too big and heavy if you're shooting maybe like a 308, but they do smaller ones, but we specifically like this for the 50 cals. It's got a really good warranty with it. I think if anything goes wrong, you've got a lifetime warranty on those AccuTacs. They're a nice company to deal with as well. What don't I like about it? I would only say maybe the weight, if you were concerned about that, but you can't sidestep that. You need that robust build if you're shooting heavy calibers, you know, your 375s, 408, 416, 50 cal. You really do need a decent robust system beneath that gun to gain control of that gun, and the weight's going to help you there. So I would definitely recommend these AccuTacs for that. I've got nothing bad to say about it, to be honest. Then a couple of bipods that I don't have with me, the old Fort Meyer system, which is generally a ski feet type bipod, quite a robust build. I've used a lot of those. I've had some issues with those. They do tend to start breaking down over time, and they can be a little bit rickety. They're quite overbuilt to start with, but they're nowhere near the build quality of the AccuTac or the Atlas. I can't recommend them over and above those other two. We've put quite a lot of rounds through 50s with them, but like I say, we've had a fair few breakdown. We've had that AccuTac now on 50s for 4 years, and it's had thousands of 50 cal rounds shot using it, and it hasn't missed a beat, no problem at all. We've probably gone through about 3 of those Fort Meyer type bipods, and eventually they do start breaking down just because of the way they're made. There's some sort of fiddly parts in them. The other bipods that I see kicking about quite a lot are the old AI bipods, which were originally supplied with the AI AW weapon systems, and I never got on with them. They're like spring loaded between the legs, and then you kick them out and the legs splay out on this spring. They're very, very wobbly to start with. You know, they're you have to put a lot of forward pressure on them to get them to sort of stop wobbling around. The whole way they're built, you know, there's no precision engineering in them. I don't think they're made by AI. I think they were just bought in a bit like some of the AI mounts and stuff. They're not made by AI, they're made by a third-party company, and I got a feeling the bipods are the same. Now, the only people that I see really using those original AI bipods now are military that had those things supplied with the rifle system originally. Any other users, whether it's like PRS guys using an AI, or whether it's you know, precision rifle shooters on a range, or anyone that's sort of outside of that military, you know, you have to use what you're given type of role, anyone who has the ability to make any changes to the system, they've generally changed the bipod on there to an Atlas bipod, just the same as they've generally changed the AI scope rings to spur setup, because the originals just weren't up to the job. So I can't recommend those. I've used them, I didn't like them at all. You do see them on some other systems. I've seen them on some of the older B&T rifles used to have them on there. I just don't get on with them at all. I can't recommend them. They're not precision pieces of kit. You can muscle them into working, but you shouldn't have to overcome poor build quality by, you know, muscling things and making accommodations for it yourself. Well, I hope that helped you guys have a bit of an understanding of what's available out there, and I hope that gave you some idea of why it might be worth spending the extra money on a decent bipod. Or it might be that you are just shooting in the back garden and having a bit of fun, and you don't need to spend £350 on a bipod. So I hope that helps. I'll see you next time, guys. Take care. Goodbye now.